Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend. Mariano, what are some things that help that you've learned business-wise?
Business-wise, let me tell you what I've learned business-wise. This is something that I found extremely beneficial and informative. Is when we started this podcast, something that I've had to learn, because for you guys to keep things in perspective, it's not like you just start a podcast. There's research that goes into this sort of thing. There's not only research into the rest of the dog training world, but just logistical research into what a podcast should look like to maximize its like popularity. Mm-hmm. And the research that I have done would suggest to me that there is this middle ground between being patient and allowing things to grow on their own time, but never stopping to progress it forward. Aggressive patience is how it was coined to me. And I'm naturally an impatient person. Mm-hmm. Like I can be patient if I want to be, but like internally in my head, I'm like, oh, what the hell? Like, let's go, So it's been this total journey, because the podcast, from a business perspective, it's just grown about as fast as my business in Arizona has, which is really fast. And I'm lucky to say that. And another thing that I've noticed business-wise is I've really understood on a different level since we started this podcast the importance of doing things once to maximize your time. An example being, right in the middle of the shutdowns, Brent and I did the episode. It's actually still one of our biggest episodes, a deeper look into structure, right? Mm-hmm. And then after that was the top 5 tips for structure. Mm-hmm. And in it, we talked episodes 4 and 5. And in it, we were talking, like crate training and this and that and obedience. And, right around that time, I was getting just straight inundated with calls. Oh, my dog's separation anxiety. It's a COVID dog, got it 2 months ago, can't be without me, yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And instead of like having the exact same conversation over and over, because people call like 4 times a day, 5 times a day, on top of the dogs you have and everything else, then I would just direct them like, hey, you guys, actually, we just did an episode. Do me a favor, check this out. Let me know what you think. And a 20-minute conversation turned into a 4-minute conversation. And sure enough, they call back and they're like, we love it. We're in. What do we do? What's next? That. And I've really taken that to heart of like, man, not only with the podcast, but how else can you streamline things in training so that you're free to do your thing?
Yeah. And this ultimately brings down like content creation, right? Like this is the most consistent thing I've ever done in regards to social media or content or having a platform or whatever, right? Like, so those of you guys who follow us, like we only made it to 1,000. It took us less than a year, but we made it to 1,000 followers. And some of the people that we're interviewing, they have like 50,000, 60,000, 80,000, 1 million followers, depending on what platform that they're on. And we could have bought followers. We could have done things different, but
I hate those messages.
This is an organic like thing, right? Like we wanted to have people who actually listen, who actually want to participate, who actually want to make this their podcast, and it's working. And the interesting thing is, I come from a film background and a performance background. So like talking and improvising is not something that difficult for me necessarily. Right. But what we see is that this growth of the podcast has taught me how, if you stay consistent, not only can you help more people, but your reach is better. Right. Like I can help more people by sending them the episode or sending a video, or we can bypass things like having to sell something, right? Like having to sit down. I think it was Sean O'Shea's episode where he was talking about, the old style of selling, which was, you have a phone call with somebody and you sit them down and you bring it in for a consultation and then you schmooze them and then you take their money. And I was like, oh, you're describing exactly how I sell. Pretty much, right? And just having a platform or having content or having a video of what it is that you do, like just that was really proven to me of like, hey, if you just create the content and put it out there, not only does it save you time downstream, but you're also able to help people, because not everybody who watches or listens to your content is going to have to pay you for it, right? But having that free content out there helped so many people. And I want to thank every single person who DMs us or sends us emails, who just literally, some of the emails just go, been listening to your podcast for the last 2 months. You guys are amazing. Thank you for what you're doing. And just those messages are so powerful, like to make us to want to keep doing this, you know?
That's a good point, because Sean, it's essentially the, like, if you build it, they will come, right? And I don't think Sean was the originator of that, because I know Jeff was training since before Sean. And of course, like Tyler, I think, and Tommy, they were like some of the first trainers on YouTube, right? So they kind of grew with the platform. And but I've got to hand it to Sean, because for me personally, Sean O'Shea was definitely a big inspiration. Years and years ago, when I was learning e-collar, I was watching Sean O'Shea, and I knew that he was very tightly linked with Jeff, because they did their other stuff. Like, they not only had their like their before and afters and the tutorials for the good dog, but they've also had like Q&As, and Jeff was like always there, and I knew that they were a thing. And then T3 at that time was just in the works, but they were talking about it. It's going to be me and Jeff and this and that. But I think Sean definitely was one of the front runners. I think that's fair to say, of this new form of marketing with dog training. And I think that it is fascinating how it's almost like this funny little play on the commutative property, like 2 + 3 = 3 + 2. But it sometimes it doesn't. Like, you can put all this free content out there, and Brent's absolutely right. There are people out there who, for one reason or another, aren't going to be a client, right? They're too far away, or they can't afford it, or or just whatever the case. But if that's the case, they were never going to be your client anyway. However, there are a ton of other people out there who are close enough, or whatever the case, who don't have these barriers to entry, who would have no idea who you were if it wasn't for this content. And it's not something to look at like, well, if you're giving away all your training secrets, then you're not going to have business, because the key to it is, it's like anything else. It's like, we all know logistically how to be in amazing shape. You eat right and you work out. Like, we know how to do it. But nobody, like, not everybody can do it.
Of course,
right?
I know. Right?
Yeah, with my Adonis like figure. But almost nobody does it, because the work is everything. That's what Michael Ellis was telling us. That's what Tommy Davis was telling us. Tyler Muto is the practice, the theory, the hands-on, that and all the stuff that comes with it. Because Sean, I remember when we spoke with him, and I had spoken with him before, and it was just training dogs, yes, but like, I'm up like at 4 or 5 in the morning writing my blog posts on a piece of paper. That's how they got the books going. Is they take all these different ideas down, like for the posts, and then over time they just take them all, dwindle them down into like a cohesive message, and then that becomes the books. And that was a form of marketing in dog training that always stuck with me. So from a business perspective, that was really a big motivation, for at least for me, when we started the podcast. Was like, dude, that's the point. Let's really tell people about stuff in detail, and let them know that we know, and hopefully this helps someone. And naturally, I know personally, I've gotten clients out of the podcast. I don't know if you have, but and I've been getting clients. Like, I've noticed that with the podcast, my client pool has gotten a lot bigger. Like, I just got my first eval from a client who's moving here from New York. And I've gotten a couple dogs from down south in Tucson, Arizona, and all over the place, or clients who are like now here, but they're from other places, and they all tell me like, oh, well, we actually found you on the Dog Trainers podcast, or whatever the case. So from a business perspective, yeah, it's definitely opened my eyes to things. Not to mention, this was a tip that I was giving to trainers when we did our episode on marketing, right? Old school marketing was just, how about this? Take some of your business cards and go to different kennels and rescues and like breeders and whatever, and just give out the cards, and just ask them like, hey, would you guys be so kind as to give this card out with this rescue dog, with this puppy, with this whatever. And when I reached out to a local like puppy store here, you guys know how it's so political in the dog training world, pure positive versus this and that. So of course I reach out to them, and I'm like, hey guys, how do I get on this list of referred trainers? Like, obviously I would expect you to want to like vet me out and make sure that I'm good, and that's fine. Here's my info, here's my website. And I lucked out, because the person who's in charge of all that was, I was like, okay, so here's my information, and also here's the podcast. Like, this will give you a really accurate idea of how I work. And they hit me back immediately like, oh, I love the podcast. I just finished the episode with Michael Ellis. And I was like, awesome. Oh, sweet. So stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, and there's so many other things that we've learned that are just more direct, like to dog training, with the method and formula and all that good stuff. But we want to get into that next. So yeah, man, I mean, let's talk a bit more about some things that we've learned from guests, because I know that there have been so many.
Well, yeah, I think a couple things that I've learned directly from, some of our interviewers that really helped me in my practice, right? One would be Michael Ellis, right? Like, obviously, how can you talk to Michael Ellis and not learn something? I think one of the big things that he brought to my attention was how important, you know, not having short programs is. You know, he said, you know, back when I used to do board and trains, he goes, you know, I do a minimum 6-week program, right? So lengthening my programs for the betterment of the work and the dog, and also my staff, and making sure that the dog isn't getting unnecessary pressure put on him. That's one thing I learned. And also what I think has been the most important, right? Because my old format, I used to train a dog for a month, and that month the owners wouldn't see the dog until the demonstration, right? Which I feel is a very old school format of like, you know, look, I train a dog and ta-da, look how wonderful he is, right? But one big thing that I pulled from that episode of Michael Ellis was talking about just how important it is for them to come and learn the technical skill. Right. And obviously I would do follow-ups in my old practice, and, you know, I was very successful doing follow-ups post-training, but man, the amount of time that you save doing follow-ups or lessons while the dog is still in session, and the amount of thoroughness that you can have while people are, you know, actually having to come to you to work with their dog and also visit their dog, right? So you kind of have a little bit more leverage. Like before, when I used to do the post follow-up thing, pretty much, you know, you train a dog for a month or so, and then the dog goes home, and you might require them to come and do their lessons, right? But a lot of times people are happy with better, right? If it's 50% better, 80% better, 90% better. And so what tends to happen is when people have a dog who is better and they just paid X amount of money for a dog to be good, it doesn't matter how many times you tell them you have to do work, you have to do work after, you have to do work after, people are happy with way better. Right. And so what tends to happen is they might do one lesson, maybe 2 lessons, but they would never do enough lessons where they actually had to master control over their dog. Right. And what I've learned was in my programs, if I have that person come back every single week, right, what it did is it kind of dampened that fear of like, I don't get to see my dog for a whole month. Right. It dampened that. If I said, no, you're going to come and see him every week, actually. But also what it did is my owners were able to take their dog home more competent than previous clients. Right. So not only do they know how to handle their dog, how to walk their dog on leash, but now they're actually knowing their house rules. And now they're knowing, you know, the psychology of why they need to do that. And all of that is because I was able to leverage the fact that they missed their dog and I made them do lessons now. Right. And so I think that was so important. So I want to say thank you to Michael Ellis for just dropping that little seed, and it just bloomed into, it saved me time, technically saves me money, technically makes a better product. Definitely the dogs are happier, the people are happier, everyone wins. So that was such an amazing idea I pulled from Michael Ellis.
Dude, Michael Ellis was just a gold mine of information. That was awesome. And I loved like when his wife stuck her face in upside down. That was really fun too. But you know, I couldn't agree with you more, especially regarding that point, bringing clients in during the board and train program. And I think it's something that I implemented as well. And it's, you're right, totally, about it being another way to like ease clients out of the fear of like, man, I don't get to see my dog for this long, you know. But something that I've really found very invaluable about it, about like why, you know, if we're talking about in a more direct sense, what we've learned from guests, what I've learned very directly from people is to start thinking about the why, start making things make sense, because this is a podcast. We have to explain these things. And I know what everybody knows. I know everyone knows what I mean when I say there are things like, you know, but you couldn't quite put into words as to why or how, right? Until you try. And what I think it makes sense for me with having guests, sorry, I'm thinking podcast, but with having clients come in while the dogs are board and training is when you have them in once a week, not only do they get a chance to hit the ground running because they've had a few lessons before the dog goes home, but the benefit of doing it weekly is they get to see the dog in the various phases of training. So they get to practice and they actually get to learn how training works. So you're turning them into like mini dog trainers, as opposed to just, here's all you need to know to kind of do your thing. See you later when you realize you have like this other problem. Because I have the same problem with clients too. Like they'll do a lesson or two, then you won't hear from them for like 6 months, you know, and I'm like, where you been, man? Like, of course the dog's jumping. Have you been doing X, Y, Z? And they're like, well, no. So it's been nice because if I can show the client, this is why I do food work. This is why I do leash work. This is why I told you in the beginning e-collar was going to be the way to go, or whatever was going to be the way to go. And all the while, why I did it in this order then the clients and they have time to ruminate on it weeks, right? Because it's broken up. So they have like a long period of time to really understand, like, oh, I get it. So this, then this, then that, you know, that's the kind of thing that really helped me push them to the next level. It was all to do with the understanding of the why behind the how.
Right. Yeah, it kind of allows them to ponder about it a little bit more without the pressure of actually having the dog there. So
Right.
that was a huge game changer.